Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something that often flies under the radar, sexual harassment, but specifically in the entrepreneurial world, focusing on Japan.
Right. We hear a lot about workplace harassment, but the situation for entrepreneurs, people starting their own thing, it's quite different and often less understood.
Exactly. So, our mission for this deep dive is to explore some specific research that really tries to shed light on this. We want to give you a clear picture of the challenges without drowning you in data.
And we're drawing from an exploratory study out of Japan. It used an anonymous online survey, which is smart for a sensitive topic like this. Gathered both numbers, quantitative data, and personal stories, the qualitative side, from 197 people. And crucially, that included 105 female entrepreneurs.
Okay, so let's get into it. What did the numbers show about how common this is?
Well, the headline finding is pretty stark, 52.4%.
Hmm.
So over half of the female entrepreneurs surveyed said they'd experienced sexual harassment in the past year.
Over half. Wow. And how does that compare to male entrepreneurs in this study?
That's where the contrast really hits you. Only 15% of the male entrepreneurs reported similar experiences. 15.
So a huge difference there.
A really significant gap, yeah.
Yeah.
It points immediately to a very different level of risk based on gender in this particular ecosystem.
And remind us about the group surveyed. It wasn't
Yeah.
just entrepreneurs, right?
Correct. The total was 197 participants. 126 were entrepreneurs themselves. That's the 105 women, 20 men, and one non-binary person.
Right.
And then another 71 people involved in that startup scene. Think startup executives, employees, investors, people from support organizations.
Got it. And how did they find these people? Was it a random sample?
No, and that's important. There isn't like a master list of all entrepreneurs in Japan. So they use what's called non-probability sampling, mainly snowball sampling.
Small sampling.
Yeah, basically they reached out through existing networks, professional contacts, startup accelerators, mailing lists, social media, that kind of thing, asking people to participate and maybe share the link.
Huh. Okay, so that obviously has implications for how we read these findings, right? Like, how broadly can we apply that 52.4% figure?
Exactly. The researchers are very upfront about this. They stress that because of the sampling method and also because the study was largely focused on the Tokyo area, the findings are exploratory.
Exploratory, meaning?
Meaning they highlight important patterns and raise critical questions, but you can't necessarily say this exact percentage applies to all female entrepreneurs across Japan.
Right.
There are other things to keep in mind, too. Potential underreporting, it's a sensitive topic.
Sure.
And maybe the opposite, self-selection bias, where people who had experienced harassment might have been more motivated to take the survey. Plus, it's self-reported data, so memory and how people want to present things can play a role.
Okay, so those are important caveats. But why is this research still valuable then?
Because it's breaking new ground. It's giving us some of the first real data points and qualitative insights into an issue that just hasn't been studied much in this context, entrepreneurship, specifically in Japan with its unique cultural backdrop. It flags key issues like the role of investors, which we'll get to, and it lays crucial groundwork for maybe larger, more representative studies down the line. It gives us a starting point, a vital one.
Okay, that makes sense. So we have this initial picture of prevalence. What kinds of harassment were reported? What did it look like?
It was a range of behaviors, things like inappropriate comments or questions about their personal lives, appearance, marital status, excessive staring that made them uncomfortable, actual unwanted physical contact. Also, situations where someone acted inappropriately in an environment they couldn't easily just leave, like a crucial networking event or a meeting.
Right, feeling trapped.
Exactly. And then there was unwanted contact through digital means messages, social media, and more severe things, too. Demands for relationships, sometimes explicitly linked to getting support or funding that's quid pro quo.
Yeah.
And even stalking in some cases.
And who are the main perpetrators identified in the quantitative data?
This was a really significant finding. Investors came out on top. 43.2% of the reported incidents involved investors.
Wow, nearly half involved investors. Given their power over funding, that's deeply concerning.
It absolutely is. After investors, the next most frequent groups were customers, then mentors, and people from those entrepreneurial support organizations.
The study has more detail on that, I assume.
Yes. Table 10 in the paper breaks it down further, looking at the perpetrator's role and gender. And another key stat, 27.2% of all the cases involved quid pro quo harassment.
So a direct link between the harassment and potential business opportunities or resources?
Explicitly so in over a quarter of reported cases.
Okay, so the numbers paint a pretty grim picture of the what and who, but the study also dug into the why, right? Using qualitative data.
Yes, they analyzed 48 detailed written responses to understand the underlying conditions that allow this harassment to happen. They used a method called inductive coding.
Which means,
Basically, they systematically read through the responses, identified key themes and ideas directly from the participants' own words, and then grouped these into larger categories and dimensions. It's building the theory from the data itself. Their figure 1 maps this out visually.
okay. And what were the main dimensions or themes that emerged from those personal accounts?
They identified 4 big ones. The first they termed embedded discrimination.
Embedded discrimination, what does that entail?
It refers to how deeply ingrained social and sort of cultural norms in Japan can reinforce traditional gender stereotypes. Things like focusing on a woman's appearance or her marital status over her actual business skills.
That sounds plausible, given what we know about traditional gender roles in many societies, including Japan.
Exactly. And the data backs this up. 68% of the respondents specifically pointed to a male-dominated culture as a factor.
Wow.
Table 5 in the study gives some powerful examples, like people making remarks questioning women working after marriage or childbirth, or comments suggesting a woman's success is maybe because she's a woman, not due to her competence.
Undermining their achievements.
Precisely. And these norms can also pressure women towards more supportive roles, discouraging visible ambition.
So it's woven into the cultural fabric, in a way.
That's the idea behind embedded. The second dimension was systemic exploitation.
Okay, exploitation.
This points to the misuse of power, specifically by those who control critical resources in the startup world, the investors, the mentors, the heads of support organizations.
Which connects back to the quantitative finding about investors being the main perpetrators.
Exactly. The qualitative data really fleshes this out. You see examples in Table 5, like investors making personal demands in exchange for considering funding.
The quid pro quo again.
Yep. Or unwanted advances from mentors or investors in settings where professional boundaries get blurry, like networking drinks or informal meetings. These less structured environments can become opportunities for harassment.
It really shows how that power dynamic can be weaponized.
It does. The third dimension is safeguard voids.
Meaning, lack of protection.
Essentially, yes, a lack of effective mechanisms to prevent harassment or support victims. And linked to this, a very low reporting rate. Only 14.8% of those who experienced harassment actually reported it.
Less than 15%. Why so low?
Well, Table 11b gives some reasons. Some felt the incident wasn't serious enough. Others believed reporting wouldn't actually change anything.
A sense of futility.
Yeah. And crucially, fear of retaliation was a major factor. 25.4% cited that fear. Think about it. Reporting an investor could mean losing funding. Reporting a mentor could mean losing crucial guidance or network access.
Huge potential backlash.
Right. The study also mentions insufficient education, people not always knowing what legally constitutes harassment, and a lack of clear, safe reporting channels specifically for entrepreneurs.
And they don't have the same legal protections as regular employees.
That's another key point. In Japan, the Equal Employment Opportunity Law provides protections for employees, but entrepreneurs often fall outside that scope. They're in a more vulnerable legal position.
So discrimination, exploitation, lack of safeguards. What was the fourth dimension?
The fourth was adaptive burden choices. This focuses on how victims cope, the strategies they adopt, and the consequences they face.
Or what are those consequences?
They can be severe. Table 12 shows 63% reported mental distress. Significant numbers also reported decreased confidence, lower motivation.
Impacts their ability to lead their business.
Absolutely. And for 14.8%, it led to suspending their business activities or even withdrawing completely.
Wow, so people are actually forced out of entrepreneurship because of this.
That's what the data suggests. Table 5 gives examples of different coping strategies. Some felt they had to just endure it, resigned endurance. Others tried to confront it, but faced negative outcomes, costly confrontation. And some, as mentioned, chose to exit the ecosystem entirely.
And for an entrepreneur, their business is often so tied to their personal identity.
Exactly. It's not just a job you leave behind at 5 p.m., so the impact of harassment can be incredibly deep, affecting their whole sense of self and livelihood.
The study put these four dimensions together in a kind of cycle, didn't it?
Yes, they propose a cyclical framework. You can see it in their figure 3. It suggests these dimensions aren't separate, but interconnected and self-reinforcing.
How so?
Well, the embedded discrimination creates a context where systemic exploitation of power imbalances can thrive. The lack of safeguards means this exploitation often goes unchecked. This forces victims into making difficult adaptive choices, which might involve enduring the situation or leaving, and these outcomes can inadvertently reinforce the initial discriminatory norms and power structures. It becomes a vicious cycle.
Making it really hard to break out of.
Very difficult. And the researchers really stress that you need both sides of the coin, the quantitative data showing the scale, the what and who, and the qualitative data providing the why, the context, the lived experience to truly grasp the whole picture.
Okay, so wrapping this up then, the key takeaways seem to be a surprisingly high prevalence of sexual harassment reported by female entrepreneurs in this Japanese study, with investors frequently identified as perpetrators. And this is fueled by a complex mix of factors: embedded cultural discrimination, systemic exploitation of power, a real lack of protective safeguards, and the heavy burden of choices victims are forced to make.
That sums it up really well. And again, while we need to be careful with the specific numbers due to the study's exploratory nature,
Right, the limitation.
its real importance is in bringing this often hidden issue into the light within this specific context and setting the stage for more work, more awareness, and hopefully change.
It definitely makes you think.
Yeah.
How might these dynamics play out in other entrepreneurial hubs globally, especially those with similar cultural backgrounds or significant power imbalances?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? What lessons can be learned and what concrete steps, cultural, institutional, legal, can be taken everywhere to build startup ecosystems that are genuinely safe and equitable for everyone?
A really important question to ponder. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for walking us through this research.
You're welcome. It's critical work.
And a huge thank you to you, our listener, for joining us for this deep dive into a really vital topic.